Hey listeners, welcome back to another episode of It's the People, our interview series where we explore the inside story of building companies and investment portfolios with high-octane founders, limited partners, and fund managers. We hope these conversations push you to be even better at what you do. I'm Will Hapworth, and in this episode, my partner Andy Greenfield and I got to interview Doug Baldasare, who is the CEO and founder of ARC, otherwise known as Asset Recharge Center. The company creates a smart locker system that manages company-owned handheld devices that are essential to employees being able to do their jobs. Customers like Sam's Club swear by the product and are rolling it out to their stores. In this interview, we discussed a range of topics, including the value of deep and organized customer research and the various approaches that Doug has taken here over the history of the business, the challenges of navigating the pandemic with a business that had high exposure to retail, and emerging even stronger in this new world. Some of Doug's most effective and creative sales strategies as a self-described lifelong student of sales, where his drive to win and succeed comes from, and much, much more. To start things off, Doug begins the conversation with his life story in 60 seconds.
Before we begin, we'd like to note that this interview is for informational purposes only, and that the opinions expressed should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Doug, we're super excited that you're game to do this on a Friday afternoon. Hopefully you have a bit of headspace at the end of the week to think a bit, although I know you just got off a customer call. We start our interviews with the same opening question. Can you tell us the Doug story, the life story, in 60 seconds or less, starting from the beginning? And we'll give you 2 minutes if you need it.
I appreciate that. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and Villanova. My dad was a serial entrepreneur, more of a bootstrap sort of services type entrepreneur. I grew up around the dinner table, hearing his war stories and being really excited when I could contribute or I could, have an idea to help solve a problem, even though I'm sure he'd already thought of it. For me, it was cool. Kind of always grew up interested in entrepreneurship. Started the entrepreneurship club with somebody else during my undergrad. So my university was Emory University, and didn't have an entrepreneurship club. We started it. After college, I went to work for a CEO founder of a funded tech company. Worked for her in a chief of staff role. I moved with the company from New York to London to do enterprise sales. And I ran our company's small Asia Pacific division out of Beijing before, during, and after the 2008 Olympics. So I had this sort of unintentional, or maybe it was actually intentional, I'd say an informal rotational program within a funded tech startup allowed me to see all these different functions, different geographies, different companies in terms of clients and partners. With really great training ground for me. And that was sort of the purpose of why I went into that type of a role. And then I ended up coming back to the States, doing my MBA at Wharton, and started ChargeItSpot, now often DBA ARC, Asset Recharge Center. I started that in, depending when you count, let's start 2011, 2012. That's my 90 to 120-second version.
And Doug, as you reflect back on the early life, you mentioned your dad, are there any particular moments, memories that really jump out that you think defined kind of the career path that you've had? Just top of mind, things that you think back on, like this happened, it's partly why I became who I am.
I think that he always instilled a work ethic. My grandfather was a backbreaking concrete mason entrepreneur where he had a cement truck and did blue collar sort of entrepreneurship, pretty much as a sole proprietor, and worked multiple different jobs, delivering milk, waking up at 2, 3 a.m. to deliver milk before he did a concrete job. And then he was pin setting in a bowling alley in the evening. So it was the sort of workhorse upbringing that I feel I had. And then, my dad went to college and was able to do something less backbreaking, physically, probably, equally backbreaking figuratively. And, we always worked growing up. I was, if I got an allowance, I had to work for it. If I wanted more than that, I had to work more doing something else, raking leaves, removing, for neighbors in the area. So I started the little tutoring business in high school where it would just be tutors. So I think he always encouraged, and I was always encouraged to try to enterprise to find ways to sort of accomplish what I wanted to. And I think that it was a path that I felt was quite natural for me, just kind of from the beginning.
But I'm also curious about something else because, lots of people, not lots, but people become entrepreneurs. They have, I'm a programmer, I'm a finance guy. From the time we met you, you felt like a sales beast. And I'm curious, springboarding off of Will's talking about your earlier life, was there anything back there where were you always a guy who could close a deal?
I'm reflecting more on what you said, Andy, and your prior question, Will, any defining moments. I think that there's a few things that come to mind that I'll use an example of something. So I learned what a stock was, the stock market was, when I was like 5 or 6. My dad told me it was a piece of a company. You're buying a piece of the company, and I'm like, oh, can I have like the computer room or this room? I'm like, not a physical piece. It's a small portion of a company. And so I had read or learned about, I said, it'd be really cool if you can make a computer that was like a handheld computer. And my dad said, I think there's a company I read about that does this called Franklin Electronics. And I'm like, are they publicly traded? And he said, yes. And so for my birthday, I got some money from my grandma that I was intending to invest in Franklin Electronics. And my dad was dragging his feet quite a bit. I kept bugging him to do it. And so then I decided to just call his stockbroker up and place the trade. And I was like 6 years old or something like that. And the way my dad found out about it was by getting like a confirmation in the mail, the stock trade or whatever it was. And I was like, yeah, you were taking way too long. So I think there was like some of the entrepreneurial traits that sort of encapsulates for me were a sense of impatience, a bias towards action, and sort of a peer-to-peer approach when it comes to transacting or getting deals done. That I was 5 or 6. The stockbroker was also the friend of, he had a son my age, so he was a family friend as well. So that made it a little easier to figure out what his phone number was and call him. But a peer-to-peer approach, and so that's how I've approached sales, is sort of bias for action. Treat people as your peers, whether they're technically above you, technically below you, and sort of some sort of lack of fear and a lack of social approval. So I think people tend to seek social approval and then find their way out of a deal because they don't want to impose, or they are afraid of rejection, or they want to do the polite thing. And you can be quite thoughtful and considerate of people and not trample at all, or be impolite, but you're not while also taking the hard approach or saying the thing that might be difficult to say, or if you feel it, say it. If you think somebody's kind of headed down a path where they don't want to work with you, kind of just say it feels a bit like this. Is that what's happening here? That's okay.
Doug, everything you're saying encapsulates everything we know about you. And in addition to kind of the peer-to-peer kind of sales approach, I feel like so much of what you're saying comes from a deep sense of confidence, transparency, honesty, willingness to say what other people are not, as well as creativity around how to approach something. Like, was that something that you honed later in life? Because I can see how some of the stories that you're sharing led you to call the broker and, want there to be a sense of urgency, but also just this. I mean, I feel like I've only come to this in the last 5 years of just tell them what you're thinking, what you feel, share that, we have a advisor who said, just share the dilemma. But it seems like you got this much earlier on. Like, did that come from anywhere? Or?
I appreciate the notion that I've been an expert since I was young, but that's certainly not the case. And I'm certainly not an expert. I'm always learning and growing and developing. I think I'm good at certain things on the sales side and business development side. Where did it come from? I don't know where it came from. I think I've always prepared and worked really, really hard. So like undergraduate academics, for example, like I just worked really, really hard and prepared and got outcomes that, really felt like finished with, a third of my class, undergrad business, like whatever, with 230, 240. And that was sort of a thing that I think added to my sense of confidence that if I work really hard, I have the capability to deliver outcomes. And I think I would take that approach. I took that approach forward with me where, I would really prepare my butt off for an important meeting. I would prepare my butt off for my approach, whether it's creative, maybe it's a creative approach, but I would be really studied in how I would go and try to get a big meeting with somebody and be really, really thoughtful. I'm much more of a sharpshoot. Let me spend, 6 hours on crafting the perfect approach or the perfect approach we can, rather than a high volume sort of approach. And so, that has led me to feel way more prepared and to show up way differently in these meetings so that I will stand out and be somebody that they will find value. They got a lot of value out of that meeting, and I surprised and delighted that person. And then you start to build somewhat of a snowball where you can have relationships and track records and referrals and so forth and so on. So we have done some, and early on, it took more creativity and wasn't 6 hours, but 60 hours to plan an approach.
Andy was reminding me of one of those stories before we joined today.
You remember, Doug, the first time we met you, you can be as prepared as you want, but you had a creative approach that I've never heard before or since somebody do, which involved I can't remember the company. You walked in, I think you had a $25,000 check. You said you were going to invest in her company if she or buy the stock. It was a public company. And the reason you were going to do that, if she ends up going with ChargeItSpot, you knew that the company performance would improve and your stock would grow. Did you recall that?
Of course, yes. Pretty good. It was $31,000.
Okay.
Very close. Yeah, very close. It was Urban Outfitters.
But that's fearless creativity. You can prep all you want, but I guarantee that woman never experienced that before or since. How'd you come up with? Where'd that come from?
It came up from it came up from living in the dilemma of and a singular focus. I find that Urban Outfitters at the time was our earliest really meaningful pilot client for ChargeItSpot. They were a Philadelphia-based business. They were really kind of a perfect fit for us. We're Philadelphia headquartered as well. Our main champion at Urban Outfitters left the business for personal reasons. The person I knew I always needed to get in touch with was the COO of Urban Outfitters, who was really making all the decisions, and with what I understood to be a very tough, very, very a tough sell, tough cookie, and found a way to get to her for some conversation through one of our investors and advisor to the Wharton professor who did some work academically with Urban Outfitters and in collaboration. And I leveraged his sort of Wharton email address to initiate a conversation with the person who wasn't responding to me, was kind of ignoring my emails. He was successful. I drafted the email for him. He was successful at getting a conversation. He told the story. Then we got a conversation. I got a meeting with her in person. She liked what we had to say. I said, let us expand the pilot and bring in a third-party researcher to evaluate the value that we're creating. Let's not make this up. Let's not guess it, and don't rely on us. So let's get a third party in here. We'll fund it. And we want to once and for all look at the causality, the causal lift in sales that we believe we're creating. She liked the idea. She liked the plan. She got a group of people together. And then she kind of went silent. It was the momentum, the excitement was dying. I felt that I couldn't just wait and hope that she would somehow just write me an email saying we're in. And I was just meditating, dwelling, and really focusing on how do I move this. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Their stock price, roll this out to all their stores, their stock price will go up. I'm like, ooh, what if I actually approach them as an investor as opposed to a vendor? And so I bought the exact amount of stock, 31,000, whatever it was, which would have been a certain amount of the service fees they would have paid us. It was equivalent to what they would have paid us. And I couriered to her a packet of the business case that her team had written, some reaction from social media from our early pilot and the stock purchase and a carefully worded letter. And then she let me sit for like 3 days, and then she gave me a call, and they rolled out the expanded pilot, got the case, we did the research study, got our first data point on causal lift, and that was an incredibly important foundation for then winning other clients. Fast forward, that woman laid off a ton of people in the company because that was what was happening at the time. She then laid herself off, and then within a few months, she became an investor in our company. And since then, she's invested multiple times in the business, and I'm in close touch with her now 11 years later, probably.
Wow, what a great story. Doug, for the benefit of our audience, and I know the business is now different, but can you just tell in call it a couple sentences what ChargeItSpot is, like what that business does?
Yeah, and actually we're moving away and off of ChargeItSpot, an interesting pivot that is now the future of our business, and we can talk about that as well. Founded ChargeItSpot in 2012. 2011,
Doug, not to interrupt, but can you also tell us how you ended up?
Yeah, I want to get to that
idea.
Yeah, with the ChargeItSpot idea.
Yeah, but let's hear. I want to get to that too, but I just want to just so people understand what the business does.
Sure. Started ChargeItSpot to solve two problems. One, as consumers were desperately addicted to our mobile phones. We rely on them for so much of what we do every day. The other problem is that traditional brick and mortar retailers constantly looking for ways to drive customers into the stores, keep them shopping longer, get them to buy more stuff. We put free and secure phone charging stations with lockers into retail stores, allow customers to lock up the phone while charging. They end up spending a little more than double the time shopping. They spend 47% more dollars because they have more dwell time. They're also happier because they got a solution to their painful problem, and they're providing opt-in data to the retailer like mobile number, email address, and in-moment feedback on their shopping experience.
Yeah, and I think exactly Andy's follow-up question, it's not a straightforward concept. And I think pretty quickly our listeners are understanding what a creative individual you are. Like, how did you, if somebody said to me, come up with a not intuitive, somewhat complicated business, I don't even know if this would, I don't think I could. This one's, once you get it, but it's like, I don't know how your thought process started around this.
Like mating two problems.
Yeah.
Retailer problem, consumer problem.
It was really, I think keeping it, as we are going through the world, I try to stay, and less so now because I'm so in the trenches of my business, but still to some extent, I'm quite observant on problems that I encounter in my daily life. And occasionally I think about solutions to this problem. And this was a problem when I was with a group of friends in Miami on a vacation in between first and second year of business school. We had not charged our phones overnight after a long night out. We were kind of bruised and battered walking through town. We were going to split up to try to find Scarface on DVD because DVDs in 2011 were still a thing. We were then making these elaborate plans on how we were going to reconnect with if our phones were dead and where we were going to meet and when. Like the good old days, you probably would have had to do these types of things. But we're, lazy now, and we convenience driving. And I'm like, this really sucks. Our phones are going to die. Why can't I walk in there and charge? And I was pointing at actually at an Urban Outfitters. And I was like, well, that would bring me in. But then if I could actually lock my phone up, then I would stop. And I'm not going to twiddle my thumbs and do nothing. I'm going to actually try things on and engage. And I'm like, they'll make money and it'll be free for me as a user. And so that was the beginning of it, really.
What was it about that one, though, that you said you observe kind of regular problems. Like that could have been fleeting. And
Why did that
start to think about like what your next business could be, but like how your brain works around, well, that's when I want to turn into a 13-year, 14-year.
Nobody ever thinks it takes 13 years. It's been 12, but yet from, whatever. Didn't think it would be a 13, 14-year business. I did a fair amount of sort of in-field research, talking to consumers, like literal intercept research on the street with a clipboard and a pen and t-shirt, just to kind of ask people questions about the stress and anxiety with their phone battery running low, how frequently that happens, understanding the user problems, having some exploratory conversations with retailers to understand how important it is to drive traffic, drive basket size, drive conversion, these types of questions. I had some conversations with classmates who were normally quite, really scrutinizing and naysayers. And when I heard from some of the most stubborn naysayers that they loved this idea and it was so intuitive, it felt to me like, okay, that's sort of the investor persona, right? Sort of finance classmate, thinking about it from a problem solution, market size, et cetera. And so it felt like the pieces were in place, and it just made intuitive sense that you wouldn't spend more time shopping if you were waiting for your phone to charge, and more time without a phone on you meant you would spend more. My calculus was that you have, a certain number of people a day charging, they wouldn't have to spend that much more to cover the cost of the unit. If it's $20 a day for the unit, if you're leasing it at $600 a month, or even maybe you could come less, you're $15 to $20. Shouldn't I be able to generate more than $15 to $20 of margin per day based on lift-in sales? It felt kind of like a reasonable, and it felt somewhat provable. For me, it felt like I was well positioned to solve the problem, in that it was going to be a large enterprise sale, and I felt comfortable doing that. I also felt like the idea of not having had any hardware, or I'm not technically a builder in the sense of, in the technical sense, but I felt, generally resourceful in my, kind of my history. I think working internationally with one of those experiences to be resourceful and figure out how to run a team in Beijing when I don't speak Chinese. And so that's kind of how it stuck with me.
Hey, Doug, I heard a few references there about interviewing consumers, interviewing, friends about the pain. How much of that customer orientation, which we saw in you right out of the gate, is part of your DNA coming from your dad? If I recall, he was a market researcher or had market research companies.
Right. Yeah, good memory. Did you have a market research background too, Andy?
I did. Yeah, your dad and I spoke a little bit about that. But I'm curious about, you talk about osmosis around the dinner table, because you had that reflex, and then you did, to prove out the ROI, if I recall, you did, you had customer research, and then you linked that with point of sale data. And
yeah, I think that was the big piece. And I think I would link it back to, I did debate in high school, debate and speech. And I loved the art of building an argument. And I do recommend debate and speech, especially debate where I have experience. Like when I have colleagues who have high school age kids or soon to be high school age kids, and like, just get them on debate. I think it's so broadly helpful. But I love the idea of constructing an argument. And part of the research was to understand and learn, but also to build an argument as I was going to raise capital. Here's what I've learned. Here's the data. Here's the credibility. Here are the proof points. And then I took a similar approach with how we proved out that we were, in fact, covering the $15 to $20 a day per location of our cost to the retailer. And talked to a lot of people at Penn and Wharton who are research experts to figure out how you could design a study to isolate our causal impact on lifting retail sales. So what the pushback I had was, we'll look and we'll observe, okay, people who charge their phone, and we can physically observe them and see how much time and money do they spend in store, right? And then let's compare that to your average spend with your average ring or AOV or ADT, whatever they call it, average transaction size. compared to what we're observing the people who charge. And what's your average conversion? Meaning out of 10 people who walk into a store, 20 or 30, 2 or 3 might buy. Maybe we have 3 or 4 that might buy with ChargeItSpot. And so we were like, let's compare this. And like, well, how do you know that the person who charges their phone isn't coming for a long shop, and because they have excess time, they decide to chuck their phone in your unit to get an extra boost? They were already going to spend a lot of time and money in store. You're just correlated with higher spend. You're not causing it. And there could be a lot of other things. Maybe the charger is richer, more technologically engaged, more educated, whatever it could be about that group that's different than your average. And so we had to think about ways to isolate causation. And so what we ended up doing through lots of conversations with former professors, Ellie Fight, shout out to Ellie Fight as one of them who helped me crack the code on this. What we did do is we created this study where we'd allow people to charge normally. We would observe their time at the unit, their exit time from the store, their spend, zero they didn't buy, or the dollar amount they spent. The next 2 hours of the research study, we would fill our unit completely full with dummy phones so that when somebody hit the button, start charging, they were told, sorry, the unit's full. That became the control group, the same people who approached the unit to charge, but didn't because the unit was full. And we observed their dwell time, their time of the unit, their exit time from the store, their spend, zero, or dollar amount, which enabled us to have a perfectly matched testing control. Same people, some charged, some didn't. Then you had pushback and they said, maybe you're pissing off the people who were expecting a charge and they storm out of the store, so upset. Fine, fair. So what we did was we did do an exit survey and we asked people about their prior awareness. Did you know this was going to be here? Had you seen this before in the store? If they said yes, they had seen it and they were artificially denied access, then we kicked them out of the study. If they hadn't seen it before, didn't know it was there, then they can't be pissed because they weren't going in with any intention of charging. So we had to think through all these things in order to prove out our causal lift on conversion and sales. And that's how these research studies, we did 20 of them with 20 different customers. We repeated them. It's really how we grew the business.
Doug, I'm hoping for our listeners that there's a appreciation of just all the inputs that went into the thinking and the execution of the business. If I can shortcut to the next stage of the story, which is that in the last 2 years, you've pivoted the business into something that seems to be working out even better, eclipsing the prior company. Before you just kind of talk about ARC, what didn't factor into your calculus? Because so much did in getting ChargeItSpot going. As you think about like the next business you might start, what didn't factor into your considerations with ChargeItSpot that you think should have in retrospect?
I think when I reflect on this and I've talked with some folks about this, I think that where I should have done more research was, I did research on the problems and potential solutions. I did research on the end buyer. I did research on like investors and kind of how they would react. What I didn't really look at as well was market. And so you've got like, what do they think? Product. They say that the most important thing is, I think they say market and then team and then product, something like this. I had to give enough focus on market. And, I was going into a market that in 2012 was already hitting some headwinds, right? Brick and mortar retail. E-commerce had been quite a threat for some time already at that point. And I think when you look at other markets that are, rising tide lifts all boats, like that, you kind of want to find a market where there's a rising tide. I thought was in a market where there was quite a waning tide. And so I was fighting some serious headwinds. The other lesson, and there was some level of like, it doesn't matter, I can do it. I don't need to get the biggest slice of the biggest pie. I can get a big slice of whatever pie, and it's still a big slice. But it sort of ignores there's so much benefit on having a market momentum with a rising tide from an investor perspective, from a valuation perspective, from a recruiting perspective, from a general industry feeling into a bullish industry that's spending and investing. Or is it a risk-averse, contracting industry that's careful and afraid, and the individuals are afraid of getting fired, more than they're excited about getting promoted, right? And so you're entering an industry that just has the directional pull is not helping you at all. It's quite hard to fight, to sort of resist that or go against that. The other point is what I was selling was an opportunity for gain, right? And it was harder to quantify. Even with a beautiful research study with an impeccable test and control group, controlling for all these biases and so forth, you're still kind of singing for your supper, trying to prove the case that, hey, we're creating all this causal lift. They can't quite see it in the true dollars. They can see it as an outcome of the study, but they don't see it distinct from all the sort of revenue lines. And they didn't know they had this. There's not a problem that they have. There's an opportunity to win. And I know that if I were a retailer, I would have and would still in my heart, roll this out to all stores because I know that it creates lift, but I had a hard job. It was hard to convince people that they needed it. And that created even a much higher bar on how senior I needed to be within an organization. It's good that I had learned how to get to that senior person, and we're leveraging those senior connections and those methods to get senior with our current business arc, but I had to be senior. It was ridiculous. And so through that, I found ways to meet with CEO of Target, CEO of Nordstrom, CEO of Neiman Marcus, sort of those levels of people. I had to find ways to get to TLO, T-Mobile, et cetera, a lot of calorie burn to get to those people. So selling, I'd rather sell against pain than selling an opportunity for gain.
I don't think many people would have persisted the way that you have to get through that all to like this new promised land. And the other thing that Andy and I were discussing was, I don't even think ARC would have made sense in 2012, 2013. Maybe. Can you tell us again for the audience, like you made this pivot, what is this business? We want to learn about how you figured out to spend your time on this one now.
Andy, were you going to say something?
No. I think the story of the pivot and serendipity and black swan events like COVID, I mean, I want to hear you weave this together, which should be pretty compelling.
COVID was a very trying time for us. Our clients were predominantly brick and mortar retail, except for Target, which was considered an essential retailer and one of our clients. Every other one of our clients shut their doors for 6 to 12 months. We don't deliver value to our clients if they don't have shoppers charging their phone. The youth were sitting collecting dust. We were incredibly resourceful and creative with how we survived that very difficult time. One of the ways we did it was by understanding that overnight our clients began work on how do they make their stores safe and healthy to return to. Not just safe and healthy to return to, but have a perception of health and safety. That a consumer, you could be squeaky clean, but if you're not conveying that to the user, to the shopper, they're not going to feel comfortable coming back. And so that was the work that retailers were doing once their stores were shut and their people were furloughed. How do we come back? And so what we very quickly, were very early on to announce was that we were deploying a ultraviolet C, UVC sanitizing solution to retrofit inside our lockers in a very technical way. Your phone is the dirtiest thing you carry with you by far, 10 times dirtier than the toilet seat. And so we wanted to think the protected class of vendor partner was anything related to health and safety. And so we could get into that bucket somehow with a UVC, an announcement and delivering UVC, we could become somewhat protected. That one of our, we're on the chopping block and somebody in the room says, wait a second, they're bringing a UVC thing that can really help with perception of health and safety in our stores and making guests feel comfortable coming back. Let's give them a shot to hang around. We did things like that and 18 other things that were crazy, heavy lift, whatever to survive. just before the pandemic, let's say it was 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more at this point, one of our retail clients said, you solved this thing for free and secure phone charging for consumers with lockers and a self-service approach and charging cord built in. We have this massive problem in our back of house where we own, in their case, 200,000 of these company-owned handheld devices made by brands like Zebra and Honeywell and Samsung. These devices that associates and stores use to scan packages, look up inventory, communicate with each other, run mobile point of sale transactions. What they shared was that we're still using pen and paper to sign these devices in and out between employees and between shifts. Of the 200,000 devices last year, we lost 50,000 of them.
Jeez.
Because we're using manual processes to keep track of them, to manage them. And they also shared that devices will constantly stop working. And over the course of the year, about half of devices would need attention to get a fix. Usually it's a software fix. The software update doesn't come through, Wi-Fi disconnect, so that needs to reconnect. Maybe there's a hardware damage, but when an employee discovers that problem, they had been needing the device for something. They discover the problem, they run to the back room, they put it back in the cradle, grab a new device. And so you have this buildup of non-functioning device inventory. Roughly 30% of devices in a back row at any given point in time are not working, which is why the employee takes the device home or hides it somewhere, which is why when they get fired or they quit, the device goes missing because they have it at home, they have it hidden somewhere. It doesn't seem to be malicious usually. It's usually that people hoard the devices because nobody takes the time to report bad devices. As well, managers spend about 3 hours a day dealing with these issues of fixing devices, finding devices, handing them out, collecting them, etc. Turned out that this one customer wasn't alone. They're quite the opposite. They're the rule. Every single company that has any volume of handheld devices per location. So if the store has 1 or 2 handhelds, it's not a lot to manage. It's fine. They don't need us. If they have 10, 15 or more, above that is when it starts to get unruly, which is 80% of retail locations. And it turns out not just retail. You think about airlines below the wing, baggage handlers are all using these devices to scan the bag tags that go onto the plane. You think gate agents have them, flight attendants have them, UPS drivers, FedEx drivers, distribution centers. Every single person in the distribution center has one of these handheld devices. Hospitals, arenas, concessions, etc. If you're not behind a desk or not behind a cash register or not behind a pharmacy register, you have a device on you if you're moving around to do your job. And everybody from Amazon warehouses, which are taking us to the moon in so many different ways technologically, still using really basic methods, pen and paper, to deal with these critical productivity tools. And so we learned that there's this latent problem set with costly, tangible pain. And we realized that we were unintentionally well positioned to solve the problem by building a completely different solution called ARC, which is Asset Recharge Center. The way it works to solve these problems is you scan your badge, door pops open with the most charged device, mitigating the risk that it'll die mid-shift. You can't get a second device out. If your buddy says, grab me one, we don't allow that. We want one-to-one device accountability. If you don't return your device by the end of the shift, your name's on a report for the manager. That accountability has enabled us to bring shrink of these devices from 25% a year to about 1% to 2% a year. It's self-service. Instead of 3 hours a day of manager time, it's 90 seconds a day of manager time. And then every user, when they go to return their device, is forced to answer yes, no, if there was an issue with the device. If yes, they say what's wrong with it. Now the manager knows who reported the issue, what the issue is. In 92% of the cases, they can fix the device locally, return it to circulation rather than shipping it back. Because we don't have 30% of devices piling up, they're being fixed in real time. We're lowering our clients' device inventory that they need to have. They don't need as many backup devices. If we reduce the sort of investment in their total investment in devices by 25, 30% just on the inventory. And then there's this other piece of users are now using instead of 65% of employees using devices, now it's like 75% or higher. Users who have a device in hand, employees who have a device in hand, way more productive than those who don't. That's why the technology is there to amplify their output. And so you could effectively operate your locations with fewer people, if closer to 100% of them are using these handheld devices. They're working your charge. So there's just a ton of waste that you start to peel back layers and you realize there's so much waste under the surface. And there's actually, the problem has existed for 30, 40 years. Mm-hmm. It's just really complex to solve. It's not as straightforward as throw some lockers in there, throw some cords in there and call it a day. Companies have tried that and sort of miraculously failed and made a bad name for lockers, in fact, because the problems arise when the users don't follow the rules, which is very frequent, right? The user goes to return a device, door pops open, they shut the door, they put it in their pocket, they take it home. How do you know that they didn't return it? Well, there's different ways to do that. And we require that they plug it in and shut the door, and it's plugged in while the door is shut. That's how you get credit. What if it's a broken cord and they put it in and it's plugged in, but we're not detecting power? We don't detect power. We prompt them to try another locker. The locker 4, take it out, put it in locker 6, immediately pops open. If that happens twice consecutively on locker 4, we assume bad cable. 2 different users, 2 different devices, same locker 4 not delivering power, automatically put that out of service, flag it for our technicians to go fix in their next service visit. So in 10 years of figuring out what consumers can do wrong and not follow the rules with ChargeItSpot and all the different things that we built with our software, we took that and applied that thinking and the technology to what can go wrong from an associate perspective to tighten up and button up this whole mess of an operational problem. That one problem, I could talk about hundreds of problems that arise when users don't do the right thing, or it's a bad device. The port isn't detecting power, or the battery is dwindling, or they swap devices at lunch and Bob returns 2 devices, 2 doesn't return Bob's device. And what happens if you want 2 devices in a locker, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So I've been thinking a lot about lately that like the devil is in the details of all our business. Clearly, it's clear in your business, because from an outsider's perspective, they would not truly understand that. But when you start to explain it, it makes sense.
It's locker. Yeah, it's not. I mean, within 16 months, the business eclipsed our founding business that I started. We started 10 years prior. I can talk about some of our clients, but yeah, the funny thing is, the feedback we hear from the store level or the airport level, the distribution center level. This is one quote that I heard from one of our clients, store managers. She said, "This is the best thing that home office has done for me in 31 years." We had a different client manager say, we were vocal about how this has changed their daily lives. It's stored as a solution that we've built, but it really highlights how painful that problem is.
Yeah.
And how central this is your interface to your job.
Was it hard we had a conversation with one of our other founders, Sean Grundy from Bevy, a little while back. Yeah. Also a Fund 1 investment. And pandemic was equally hard for them because they had, devices inside of offices. And they doubled down on their vision, right? His view was this will come back. They raised a large round of capital, and that also worked out for them. You pivoted. Was it hard to make that decision, or was it?
It was sort of the conviction to suddenly pivot and go after ours. Yeah. I think this is where we get
for Sean. It was like straightforward. No, like I believe this will work.
I knew that this would work. There was a point in time prior to the pandemic where I was like, we just need to get a little farther on ChargeItSpot, and then we can have an outcome and drive returns for our investors and sort of all shareholders on ChargeItSpot. And I remember having conversation, and there was an investor or two, and they're like, "What's next?" I'm like, "Dude, back of house. I'm telling you, back of house." I'm like, "Trust me, the pain. It's ridiculous, the pain." Like, we went into the field and did a lot of research to have the conviction, right? So Jeff, my head of client success, went in. We heard the story from Target. Target's our client from our front of house business, consumer facing. Jeff went to 20 Target stores and had conversations with 20 different managers. And they're like, "You're telling me you can solve this? Like, here's my information. Here's my personal phone number. Call me. Like, I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Just take my store first." And so when you hear that, and then you start to do research with other distribution centers and you hear the same story over and over, and a belief that we can solve these problems with our know-how and our technology and our teams and our track record and relationship, it was a level of rigor and professionalism that we brought to our clients. We're like, all right, this is getting a lot, like we're not having a tough time getting calls or, getting toward agreement. Like this is all like we're water rolling downhill versus pushing it uphill. So it was a kind of a natural listening, hearing the market kind of conviction that we developed. Yeah.
And if I could just draw one more parallel, because we just interviewed Sean. That business was born out of a deep sense of purpose around plastic in the ecosystem in the world. So for them, it was always easy to fall back on that as like the thing that drove them. I don't know if you were deeply passionate about mobile phone charging, but if not, like, what is it that drives you through all these walls above all else? Like,
I'll answer on the micro level and then a macro level. Your question is more macro, and I want to answer that. But where you first I made my mind go was around what impassions me about ARC, and I'll give you a ChargeItSpot as well. But ARC, I personally, because Sean has this vendetta against wasted plastics, I have a vendetta against wasted time and money. I hate inefficiency. I hate when my time is wasted. And when I'm not using my moments to create either, value or fun or exercise. Like, there's only 3 things I can do in this world for myself. Nobody can exercise for me, nobody can have fun for me, and nobody can create value, can be the one to create my wealth or my value or whatever it is. And I can't stand when there's a loss of time due to inefficiency and something could be done better. That's at a more micro level. On a macro level, yeah. On a macro level, it's sort of the same drive and relentless approach that says, I need to get a senior meeting with insert name of company. You're throwing me into the jungle of wherever it might be, of Beijing during 2008, and I'm surviving at odds. And with poor odds, there's a thrill to me of creating something from nothing. And there's a thrill to me of surviving against bad odds. And I do give credit to my parents and my grandparents. In particular, my mom's side, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. My survivor story is nothing. My grandfather, backbreaking cement, concrete mason, got his family out of Queens, rough area of Queens, to Long Island so they could get a decent education and go to a SUNY, state New York school. So I feel like we're a lineage of different types of survivors. And yeah, that's what the pandemic was. That was the pivot to ARC. And so that's how I would think about it.
Yeah. And I noticed early on, you said one of the challenges with ChargeItSpot was it wasn't so much addressing pain, but I'm not sure providing pleasure is the other side, but it was tougher to quantify. ARC, it's 25% of these devices, bye-bye. That's pretty easy to quantify that pain.
Yeah. And we're taking a similar. There's a ton that we learned from that first business. There's certain ways of how to operate, and then there's certain sort of best practices that we learned. One of which is I mentioned these research studies with our ChargeItSpot consumer-facing business. That worked really well, actually. You brought in a third party, you had a principled approach, you create a structure around a decision from the enterprise client where you say, okay, here's how we do this. We're going to cover the bill on this research company that's going to come in. We have a repeatable process that here's a methodology. We're going to have a kickoff meeting. We're going to walk through methodology. We're going to walk through the goals, like what is a good outcome, and we're going to talk about what could happen after if we hit that goal. We're going to go away. We're going to spend some period of time doing the research, some period of time doing the analysis. Give us 2 months. We'll be back here for the same group, and we'll show you how it went, and you'll decide what to do from there. What you get from that is you're bringing a sense of objectivity to the table, right? You bring a third party expert to analyze financial impact of your work together. You are investing, which means you kind of probably get the senior person to the table for 2 meetings. I'm going to write a check for this and this. I need you at 2 meetings. I need you for 2 hours. I need the beginning here, the end there. Is that a fair trade? So people will be more willing to give their time when you are funding something for good cause, for bringing principled insight to the table. They can use to make their decision one way or the other. And you're putting a time band around the decision, right? So instead of it just being this amorphous decision of discussing internally and then getting sidetracked by some other priority, whatever, now we've got a clear start and end point. And what else do you need after that end point? You kind of got everything you really need. If you believe in the methodology and you believe, in the entity that's doing it, and you have your data people saying that this checks, you're kind of saying, well, for what now? And you're kind of a puny person if you're a leader and you can't make a decision after that. It's not really fair. You get some level of cognitive dissonance if you're not getting a decision after that, and if you're jerking the person around. So we're looking at actually bringing that into we're going to do that with ARC now, even though we don't really need it because it's so evident. To your point, Andy, on 25% make an easy story. I still like it from all the other perspectives. And an analogy that I heard from a sales trainer. By the way, I have sales training almost every week. So you know, if this is a strength, can I consider myself an expert? I consider myself a student of sales. One of the sort of frameworks that I heard about sales that really resonated with me is that as in sales, if you're in a business development or sales capacity, what you're driving the car, you're steering the car, and you're controlling the direction of where you're headed, which is sort of how we approach the research study. That's steering the car. This is how we do it, right? You go here. The prospect can get out whenever they want, in or out whenever they want, and they're controlling the gas and the brakes. They're giving you speed and they're giving you in or out. That's all they're doing, but you're steering, and that's what you have. You're never going to accelerate them. In fact, if you try, you'll get the opposite. And guess what? If you try to slow them down, they're probably going to accelerate. So let them drive, and let them know they're driving. Let them know that this is them driving, because you want that agency to do what ends up making a deal happen.
Doug, having been partnered with a trained philosopher in Andy over the last 14 years, I love your description of basically painting them into a corner that they can't get out of because it just makes too much sense. Andy, that's very much Andy's strategy as well.
I love the analogy. I mean, there's one more lesson that just is infused through everything. And again, maybe it goes back to your dad, and that is the relentless use of customer research. You alluded to sending one of your guys out to talk to 20 target store managers, rather than doing, and we see it all the time where, super smart founders say, hey, I believe this is a good idea, and in my bones. We always talk about, we don't care what you believe, we care what you know. And throughout the Doug story here, it's, over and over again, you're a smart enough guy, obviously, but you're always looking through the eyes of the consumers. And if that, that's a lesson that, every entrepreneur should think about, and you're doing it relentlessly, which.
Appreciate it. I think part of it as well is like, I suffer from the idea of, will I be credible in my conversations, especially early on? And I'd rather not need to be credible. Let me be credible by not needing to be credible because I'm showing you other stuff, right? So don't take my word for it. Don't take my word for it. My word is biased. You're not going to believe my word. The way that I want to earn trust with you is by not needing to take my word for it. And then eventually you'll take my word for it because I've shown you my approach. So one of the things I do, Sam's Club, we're finishing our nationwide rollout with them. 1,200 units, all 600 of their stores. They call them clubs. So about 40% of those units are in plain sight. They're actually they're towards the back room, but they're in a hallway where you can kind of observe them as a member, of guest member. And so I'll tell customers, I'm like, just go to any Sam's Club. Don't let me cherry pick. Just go to any Sam's Club. Talk to people who have been there at least a year, because you need them to know the maybe 2 years. Let's say they need to know the before, and ask them about the before and after. Don't take my word for it. Take their word for it.
Doug, you've had a unique perch on this transformation in retail. And I'm curious, I'm sure you have lots of thoughts. You even talked about, maybe one of the inputs to the thinking around ChargeItSpot was not thinking enough about kind of market macro rising tides versus headwinds. Where do you, predictions, where do you see this all going? My life as a consumer in 2024 is so different than my life as a consumer in 2013. What does it look like another 10 years from now in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think the middle kind of goes away, and just in senses of legacy apparel brands that rely heavily on brick and mortar are tough. They're the kind of ones that, so I think those are tough businesses. I think apparel is tough combined with brick and mortar. When you look at many retailers, I put Walmart, Amazon, Target, Home Depot, some of the big box retailers that are not fully relying on one product category like apparel. I put them a little bit to the side, and I'm thinking about some of your department stores, some of your apparel retailers. You think about the people who have graduated through those ranks, and a lot of them are merchandisers, and a lot of them are store operations people. And I think that the companies that will win are those that promote technologists and data scientists, and making decisions based on, retail has historically been a gut-driven decision-making, culture. And I think that the ones that have done well have infused more science, more math, more data objectivity, and a culture that let the best ideas win rather than sort of political hierarchy kind of thing. And so I think, there are some digitally native brands, like some of my colleagues, some former classmates at Dagney Dover have done incredibly well. They use data first. You look at the Rebecca Minkoff had a really strong culture of technology and data orientation, with Yuri Minkoff being, of that background. Those are the types that I think will win. I think those that kind of still stuck in old ways are going to be tough.
If you could add a power to Doug, what would you add? You could wave a wand and add a capability you don't have.
Because it's sort of a recent thought that I've had. I might change my mind if you were to ask me this question a couple of weeks from now. This is a recent thing that I've been kind of contemplating. Is on one hand, I was talking about last night at dinner with a mentor of mine. On one hand, I have an obsessive singular focus on when I approach a problem, and that's really helpful and is a tool for me. The same obsessive singular focus makes it hard for me to let things go. And it could be simple that, I'm talking micro right now. Like I had a conflict with a provider or partner or whatever. It's hard for me to not dwell on that. So the ability to turn off the dwell, to allow me to expand my mind in other ways and create and be productive and add value. So as not to let certain things be something that I dwell on too much. And it's a careful balance, because that singular focus is what got me to the stock certificate with, the COO of Urban Outfitters and let me solve that problem and get that done because I was upset with solving that problem. But then dwelling on something that I'm not actually actively solving in the moment, I need to figure out a way to put that to the side so I can focus on more value creating efforts.
You just illustrated the classic concept that the flip side of a virtue is a vice.
Yeah, I mean, along that vein, I heard it came up on my Instagram feed, Roger Federer talking about a pretty similar concept, which is like in tennis, you can't dwell on the point that you just lost. Like if you do, you won't win the next one. And to be the best, you only have to make, I think it was like 53% or 54% wins of the shots that you make. So like, you just have to move into a totally different mindset point to point. I think Andy and I are both people that sometimes dwell a bit too much on something. We obsess on it.
It's tough.
Hard to let go.
And then since you spent time in China, I think it's a Chinese proverb, what you don't let go of weighs you down. Much easier to say than do.
Probably much easier to say in English than Chinese as well.
Doug, you've been super generous with your time, wisdom, thoughts. Hopefully, given your vendetta against wasted time, this has not been wasted time for you. One last question we like to ask. Other than family, we know your dad plays a big role in the story. Anybody that you would like to thank in particular?
I would like to thank my girlfriend for her patience with me as I have my obsessive singular focus on certain things and then dwelling on others. That part of your life, and she's part of my life. I like to thank my teacher growing up. I was really lucky to have teachers that pushed me and saw something in me and supported me and challenged me. And I'd say that, from high school to college to MBA, really across the board, French teacher in high school has really helped me explore open up a language side of my brain and explore the world. I had several teachers undergrad who believed in me. Reshma Shah, my marketing professor. I had a private equity professor who was really pushing me. I had Andrea Hershatter, who was the undergraduate dean, who supported and pushed me in certain ways to challenge myself more. And then in grad school at MBA, I had, I would have been in between was my boss out of college, Shobha Purushothaman, and her co-founder, Mr. Hayward. They believed in me and gave me sort of free reign to go in an agency to go and solve problems and learn a lot along the way. I'd say Penn and Wharton have been amazing support groups. I was in the venture initiation program, which is sort of the on-campus incubator. They continued to be supportive. The Wharton Baker Retailing Center had continued to be supportive and partners with us all the time, and helping make introduction to invest, in general, the Penn community with investors and customers. Pete Fader was an important professor and still advisor, investor in the business who helped us along the way. Yeah, I feel there's been a lot of people who've been willing to help. So, and you said aside from family. So
yeah. There's a purpose to the question. Although I think I normally say a person, but it's pretty awesome to hear you just rattle off all the people. So that was great. Doug, thanks so much for being willing to do this. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening. I highly encourage you to visit our website to find many more just like it. We'll be back soon with another interview.